Welcome to Developing the Leader Within podcast, the podcast that brings you leadership insights from the brightest minds shaping our world. Join us as we dive into conversation with trailblazers, innovators, and change makers, spanning every corner of the globe. Get ready to explore new perspectives, gain actionable insights, and become the leader the world needs today. Unleash your potential. Tune into Developing the Leader Within podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Let's embark on this transformative journey together. Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
We are coming in live today talking about some important stuff. Now, I know most of you have had your run-in with psychological safety sometime in your career. Whether you were just starting off, whether you've raised all the way up to the top of the executive ladder, if you will, or if you're just starting in entrepreneurship, psychological safety is something that we all face. And so since I wanted the expert in the psychological safety arena, the newly minted best-selling author about psychological safety herself, Amervis, is joining us, and we're going to talk about this important topic. Amervis, thank you for being with me. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for inspiring a new generation and teaching a new generation on the effects, the important effects of psychological safety. But before we get into all the great conversation, take a moment, tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get hot and heavy on topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a leader, and I'm a fierce advocate for psychological safety. I grew up in North Philly, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in the concrete jungle, so to say, and then I left the concrete jungle and went into the corporate jungle. And I have done many, many, many things in my career, but I think the thing that I'm most proud of is the ability to provide psychological safety for those who I interact with, not just my team members, but in any space that I'm in is something that I was fortunate to get in my career in some ways, but more often than not did not get. And so therefore, that is something that I have made my mission now to do in life, is to provide that in many ways to all the leaders out there, who, whether they're emerging leaders or whether they're needing some refreshers and things of that nature. I feel like my spirit has called me to promote this message, this public service announcement in ways of sorts. So yeah, I can go through all the other, as we chat, I'll tell you more about my career path and how I ended up in project management and things of that nature, because you can't manage projects, which is how strategy gets executed, without coming across psychological safety, because everything is done through team members. So
All right. Well, folks, I want to take a moment and thank everybody that's joining us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and the likes. So, psychological safety, for those that have not experienced it or are oblivious of what that is, you are either at the receiving end of it
mm-hmm.
or you're giving it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when it's void, meaning it's not present,
Mm-hmm.
everybody feels it.
That's right.
I have been unfortunately part of many industries and chances where psychological safety was never a thing, right?
Right.
You would not even think of the word psychological safety because there was no safety.
Safety, what is that?
No minds were safe. Let's
Yeah,
just say
we got
that, right? Yeah,
OSHA requirements for safety, but not
OSHA was there, right?
not
But not your
emotional or
mind.
mental safety. Yeah.
And the funny thing, Mervis, about that is that everything we do are usually centered around two things: either your mind or your heart. You're
Mm,
either driven by your heart, right? You say, "Hey, my soul would stay pulling me." You're either driven by your heart or you're driven by your mind. What your intellect is, and your
mm-hmm.
knowledge and the experiences and all that. None of that is recorded on the other side, right? Your hands, your body do what your mind says, and sometimes what your heart say. We will protect the body. We will forget many times that there is a checkpoint
Mm-hmm.
to our actions. The checkpoints are your heart and your mind. And there are a lot of people that have suffered the lack of psychological safety, and it has trickled into their future, right? Way past their moments working at a site, right? And
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about number one, your experience with psychological safety, and then why you felt that this was a needed topic having that experience.
Yeah. Okay. So, my experience with psychological safety, and I'm going to focus in on my corporate experience with psychological safety because
Sure.
I wrote a whole book about the lack of psychological safety I had growing up as a kid in my first memoir,
Mhm.
which really takes you through the origin story of sorts. But my experience with psychological safety in the corporate realm started in the 90s. And to be more specific, it started on October 8th of 1990 when I was hired at the Prudential Insurance Company of America as a customer service representative. And I had a manager. Her name was Yvette Rosendo, and she saw something in me and hired me to join her team of bilingual customer service representatives. They needed Spanish speaking members to take calls for the American Association of Retired People, AARP, which I'm now eligible for. It's so funny to say that. And I get the brochure in the mail. I'm like, ooh, really? I'm there already? Okay. So she was a mentor. She was my first mentor in corporate America. And I had people like her, people like Sharon Wright, who was my next supervisor, who they coached me and mentored me and saw my potential and told me to slow down, be more thoughtful in terms of making sure that the data was accurate. It wasn't so much about how fast I went, but about moving at a pace where I can bring others along that journey, whether it was the customers I spoke to or anybody else. And so I would say that for the 90s, from October 8th of 1990 through that whole decade, except for one experience, the majority of the people that I reported to directly, they embodied what it meant to provide psychological safety. And they did it so naturally that I had no idea that these three things, and I'm going to say tech, I'm going to name three words. And for those of you that are listening, if you stay to the end and you can name five key points of our entire conversation, my conversation with Enrique today, that you can remember about it, I will make sure you get a copy, an ebook of the book Leading with Psychological Safety. So in the 90s, I had a lot of women leaders primarily who knew how to provide psychological safety, and it wasn't about the technical skills; it was about the tech in terms of providing trust, offering trust, empathy, and consistency. And so I didn't, it's like what they say, you don't really know what you have until it's gone. And when the turn of the 21st century came and I started to realize that I started climbing the corporate ladder and I started reporting to different groups of individuals, I started not to get that same type of treatment. And I started to be dismissed or reminded that I was lucky to be a manager because in 1989, I was a high school dropout with a baby, 17 on the corner. And by 1998, a decade later, I had been promoted to corporate operations manager. And it's something that I fought for and I didn't take lightly. And I navigated spaces that weren't designed for me. And I really didn't understand that because I would go to all these classes like um, Stephen Covey's Covey program, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I would go to the Six Sigma training classes. Even when I was getting my PMI, Project Management Institute, PMP, there was a whole section on the ethics of being a project management professional. And so I took those things seriously. And I remember reading one of the Covey books where he talked about trust is the foundation of every high performing team. And I thought trust is the foundation of psychological safety. And my experiences were shaped by, in many ways, being reminded that conformity is what many leaders in corporate America expect. And this thing of psychological safety, um, that is not something that any like leaders that I had interacted with in the decades that followed really felt was important. Don't get me wrong, I had a lot of people who saw things in me and try to like tell me that, hey, sorry, you're going through that. And I had leaders who tried, but the overwhelming majority of them just felt like they had to remind me of my lane and how I needed to stay in my lane. And when they invited me into space, I thought, when they would say things like, tell us what you really think, share your ideas. What are your thoughts on that? I thought that many times it was a genuine request to know what I thought. But what I learned was that for the most part, it was really, I want to know what you think as long as it's in alignment with what I think. And if it was a narrative contrary to the narrative that they were trying to portray and one against the optics, then I became the problem. Right. And then it was like, how can we get her out of here as quickly as possible? Because she might taint the rest of them with her ideas. And in many ways, I fought to stay in places because I was learning. And as long as I was learning and either moving over or moving up, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make the best of this and figure out what can I learn, even if it's what not to do. And in other cases, it was too painful and too traumatic and very much um like for me, I felt like mental health, like that was a taboo. Like I can't seeking mental therapy. Like I have to show that I'm strong. And when I finally broke down and did it, and I talked to a therapist, I realized that lots of people are suffering in silence and going through this thing called environmental depression, where they were in a similar situation that I was, where I had a lot of love in my life. The friends and family that I had created for myself, they gave me love all the way around. But when I was in these toxic, dysfunctional work environments, I was getting a lot of hate, and that was affecting my self esteem. And to some degrees, I think that that contributed to my imposter syndrome. Because I tried to pretend like I didn't have it, and I was like, I'm a cycle breaker. I don't have imposter syndrome, but I had a really smart conversation with a really smart lady not too long ago who kind of let me realize that I do have a little bit of imposter syndrome, and we all do. How could you not have a little bit of imposter syndrome when you spent decades being gaslit and convinced that you're not enough? And so I think that answers the question of my experiences with psychological safety, why I felt compelled to write the book. True story, I started writing this book a couple years ago in many different ways. And then last year, I went to a psychological safety class that was facilitated by somebody who actually put words. She gave me the language to express what it was that was going through. I remember reading the term microaggressions years ago. I remember reading about tone policing, how, in tone policing, they don't come after you for the content of what you're saying. They come after you for the delivery, for your tone. And they forget all about what is the point of that you're making, and they hone in on um, the tone and how you're saying it. And bias is just another form of discrimination. I have been in situations where um, I knew and felt very much that it was because of what I look like that I wasn't getting to the next level. And because in some ways it was sexism, in some ways it was racism, and in some ways it was just plain bad management. There's nothing illegal about bad management. Is it unethical? Yeah, but nobody, even when sexism and racism is illegal, it's hard to prove. So people just put their head down or just keep it moving. And so part of the reason I wrote this book was because I was in the middle of a rebranding with my author, with my publisher, Adriana Rosales, who I have to give huge shout out to because she really helped me understand that it's okay to stop one project and start another, even though we have been going down a long path. And I told her my spirit is speaking to me, and I was waking up at night in the middle of the night, not sleeping, and I felt my ancestors were talking to me and saying, hey, all those people that reach out to you and tell you their stories, and they DM you and they say how what they're going through. And the people that I talked to, lots of women and people of color were sharing the similar stories that I had. And there was one guy that I wrote about in the book, one ancestor who I really put him in the beginning of the book and the dedication because he read my first book and he showed up in Philly, no less, when I flew to Philly at a pre-release book talk that I had, and he had his own book in his hand. And after we did the talk and we did the Q&A, I he pulled me aside and he said that he wanted to talk to me because he understood that there were some things that was very uncomfortable for me to share, and he could see that. And we exchanged some calls and some emails. And the last email he sent me, his very last words to me in that email, amongst many words, were, "Please, Amervis, finish the story." And that sat with me for 5 years. And so I wrote this book because I wanted to make sure that I was coming from a place of um, paying it forward and taking all this pain and turning it into purpose and saying, okay, now that we understand the problem statement or the opportunity statement, what are the solutions? How do we equip our young leaders to not have that old, outdated command and control, authoritative lip service, tell you one thing and do another, and treat people like robots? Because we're not robots. We have AI that we can leverage for that now. And I think the difference between future leaders is you got AI to do those mundane administrative things. Now we need to make sure that we're leading from the heart. And so that's why I wrote this book for all the people who are like, I don't know what's happening to me. Is this real? Is it not real? How do I become a better leader for myself or for other people? And I have to tell you, I cried a lot. I'm not going to pretend like I'm made of steel. As I was going through the book and wanting to make sure that it wasn't just theories. You can buy a book anywhere in business on leadership theories. There's tons of them. I've seen them. But I wanted this book to really have real world examples that I lived through, whether it was me providing psychological safety for my teams throughout my career, or whether it was the hard raw, like these are the examples where I felt like I didn't get psychological safety. And so my voice had been suppressed for so long when it came to this, that I was like, all right, well, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it in the book, and I'm going to try to create a framework where the lessons are easily digestible and consumable. And then that's where I did the what works, real world experience, and what doesn't. And I try to be a little funny with the bueno no bueno to bring some humor into it, because at the end of the day we got to laugh about some of this stuff or we're crying, and I'm tired of crying. So even though tears are healing, I want to let people know that they're not alone, right? There's a lot of people going through this stuff, suffering in silence, and not realizing that they're not the problem, right? Sometimes leadership has to evaluate whether they're the problem and do the inner work to get that inner standing so they can lead from a space of, like you said earlier, right? Lead with the heart and not so much with the mind. And before I give it over to you, I made a lot of mistakes not leading from the heart. I made a lot of mistakes trying to be like, well, I was told it's all about the numbers. It's all about the numbers. And I feel like I can sleep a lot better now that I'm not that kind of leader and that I put this out into the world. So that's my very long-winded answer, because obviously it was a question that was that was near and dear. So
Well, good, good. No, that's why we asked, and
mhm.
there's a long comment here. I
Ooh,
think you know who she is, but
yes.
but this is another example of the price that you get to pay for moving up the ladder, which is,
Mhm,
if you ask me, a bunch of hogwash. But you know, as as you were speaking, I focused on one word. Um, when you are a leader and you're looking for conformity, right? But that's the
mhm,
word that you use, conformity.
mhm,
Conformity strips people of their dignity, of their uh, identity. That's what conformity does. And so I understand that there are standards, right?
mhm.
Standards are all agreed upon. You got to get to this, you got to get at least the C to to pass the course, right? Um, that's not conformity. You're telling people, hey, you got to get here,
Yep.
or you can't get that.
Right.
Conformity is an imprinting of a person upon someone else for the sake of them being happy that it was done the way they would do it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what conformity is, right? When but I keyed into that word because conformity starts way before the corporate office. And so for those that are leading and are not providing psychological safety, more than likely when they were growing up, they were told words like, because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest cop out an adult can give a child.
Right.
I really do believe that. Because I said so gives them nothing of a reference or
Yeah.
any backing that what you're asking for is correct or is even needed, right? And
Yep.
you're not taking that person as an individual into account when you're telling them because I said so. Now, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to say, no, 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 well, this is, yes, if a child is putting their hand and is going to the fire, by all means slap that thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But stay. I
But
don't want you to get burned.
right, yeah. I don't want you to
Right.
get burned, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. But
Yeah.
when you're in an adult and in corporate
Mm-hmm.
and you're asking to conform, and there are some industries, there are some jobs that require you to strip
Mm-hmm.
away, military being one, strip
Yep.
away all you knew, except the basics, right?
Yep.
All you knew to adjust and conform to this new way of life. It literally is a new way of life because most people that go from military to civilian, they have a hard time, right? If
Right.
you ask my wife, I'm still having a hard time. Uh, she'll tell you. But uh, that is for the sake of a mission. It is for the
Mhm.
sake of what that industry is calling for, right? When you are asked to give your life at a moment's notice, get on a plane, fly 4, 5, 6,000 miles to a foreign land, fight a war. You may not come back. You have to conform
Right.
because, or else I'd be like, "Vaya, yo no voy," right? So I'm not going that way, right?
Right.
So conformity is probably one of the first main ingredients in folks not being able to provide psychological safety. And I just want leaders to listen and be aware that when you're asking for conformity from your people, that is the first sign that you're not prepared to provide psychological safety. If I cannot say, here's Enrique, he brings his own strengths and weaknesses and talents and all this stuff. How can I employ this individual to become a greater addition to this team where we can all capitalize from what he brings versus from what I tell him to bring? And it is something for you guys to kind of ponder and think about
Yeah.
when you're driving teams. All right, so my two
Yeah.
cents.
Yeah. No, it's a good, it's a good topic. And when I started my project management journey, I grew up in the whole waterfall, traditional project management, linear, define the requirements, do the design, before you build anything, make sure everything is buttoned up. And to some degree, there needed to be conformity to to ensure predictability. And then I got introduced to this thing called agile project management, and I fell in love because I realized for many, many reasons I love agile, but one of them was they promoted this idea that you can get to the end goal in a multiple of ways, and one way is not always the best way, and we should give the teams the autonomy, of course, if they're not spending big money, but decentralize some of the decision making to give teams the ability to say, without boxing them in, there's a different way to get to the end goal. And even if they didn't do it the way that you thought that they would do it, it should be okay as long as they achieve the end goal, whatever that end goal may be. And so conformity, when I was listening to you talk about it, and I was like, there were so many times when it had to be, no, you have to do it this way. And there was no rationale for why, other than like you said before, right? Because I said so. And when I learned that it's okay, you get better results and you get more creativity and you get more retention and you get more productivity when you're as a leader, you give them the vision, right? So leadership, to me, the big three things that I learned was leaders are supposed to provide a vision. Hey, here's the North Star. Get everybody excited about the North Star. Make sure you inspire people to take steps to reach that North Star. And then if there are roadblocks, move those roadblocks out of the way for them if it's not in their decision making capacity or authority to influence. You don't want to become somebody that they go to all the time without them trying, but when they do that, be that leader who does that. And so I felt a lot better when I became the leader who stopped trying to control so much. And I think because I had such little control as a child, as a youth, I kind of grasped onto this project management control thing. And when I let the reins go a little bit and step back and saw all the magical things that the team can do, I felt much better about that. And not only that, but I was able to coach and mentor people throughout my career in my ways of giving back who have exceeded where I am, and giving them those opportunities and seeing them bloom and like become leaders in their own right. That makes me a happy Amervis and a happy camper. And you're right, you said something earlier, like if you're building a plane, I definitely want some standards in place, because I don't want to be on a plane that falls apart because, hey, let the teams get creative and figure out how we're going to put the plane together or what parts they need. Or if it's in healthcare, right? If somebody is giving me anesthesia or a doctor is going to cut me open, I definitely want some standards. But if you're working in a profession where you do have some degree of flexibility, particularly now as we're knowledge workers, like a lot of us are in the business of using our knowledge to help people. There should be some kind of leeway to allow folks to come up with a different way of reaching that end goal without being criticized. And so the lack of psychological safety, where people are bringing things up, they're bringing their ideas or they're bringing their questions, and then they are crushed and their questions are used against them in their performance reviews or in any conversation, that is no bueno. And I don't want to experience it. And I don't want to ever make anybody feel that way. And I think at one point I wrote in the book, I tried to call and make amends with anybody who I had done that to inadvertently, because I didn't know any better, because that's what I was taught. And I didn't, when they say when you know better, you do better. But I'm pretty sure there's at least one person out there that's like, you didn't get to me, or you tried to get to me and I didn't care because I didn't believe you. And I um wholeheartedly feel like sorry. I'm sorry. Now that I'm doing better, I want to spread the message and make sure that other leaders are doing better and not doing some of those things that I was taught. So that's my answer to the conformity. I was taking notes when you were talking,
Good
so I
deal,
was
good
like
deal. No, and now they got it recorded, so hey, they want to play it back, they can
yeah.
get they can get that several times if they need it.
Yeah.
And as we grow,
Yeah.
both personally, professionally, in industry, out of industry, from one organization to another, the key thing is, and I do applaud you for going back to some folks. There's some people that have long died and they never came back, right? But what you try to do is to harness the goodness of the lesson,
Right.
right? What was the goodness of the lesson? Because we will cry over, and hey, for those that think that this brother don't cry, that's not it. I mean, I'm about a penny in the bucket away from a tear. But because some of those things are still deep, especially if it happened when you was earlier. in your
Yeah.
career. Your
Yeah.
formative years as a young adult in an
Hmm.
industry, those things hit harder, and they end up eventually coming up. They come
Yeah.
up. For
Yeah.
me, something that happened, in the early years of my military service didn't come up till I was out retired and in another industry where a similar person was leading the team,
Right.
and stuff just came out, and I was like, whoa, where was that? And I had to deal with it. So
Yeah, that's a very good point because um there have been situations where I was stuff was said to me, and the cardinal phrase that you should never say to a this, and I'm telling this to anybody who's watching this who's not a woman and who's not a person of color. One of the cardinal phrases is, well, two of them, and here's the one that really gets me is, are you sure you're not telling yourself a story? You misunderstood. Here's the other one as a third one. Um, are you being too sensitive? And that to me is like, don't invalidate my experience of what I went through. But when I hear those things, and then throughout my career, when somebody came at me, whether they were calling me a honey badger thinking that was funny, or a workhorse thinking that that was a compliment, or a blabbermouth trying to undermine me, like, it wasn't about just that one time that they said those things. To me, when they it was like it triggered my trauma, and I was like, oh, here we go again. Like, it was I was carrying all of these in each workplace and in each encounter, and they were just adding on and adding on. And part of my exhaustion with all of this and saying, okay, we need to put something out there that's going to help, was how many times do we have to go through this before we just start to stand up for ourselves and let people know that we see you, and we know that everything that you say and everything that I say comes from a place of love or fear. Are you making those comments because you're coming from a place of love, or are you making those comments because you come from a place of fear? And 9 out of 10 times, I think is, they're fearful for whatever reason. I mean, I'm only 5 foot tall, so I don't understand, why why those comments were necessary. But I just wanted to share that because a lot of times it was, hey, it's not this one little thing, not this one little slash. It's the cumulative of all, the term is death by 1,000 cuts, right? There's 1,000 cuts. It's like, one, is it enough? Ya basta. It's enough. Like, you know, so yeah, Enrique, this my
and for those viewing, thank you for joining us. But the point is,
yeah.
there is a receiving side and
Mm-hmm.
there's a giving side to psychological safety. We're trying to focus on the psychological safety from the giving side for the leaders, but we want you to understand as well that when you are approaching someone, you don't know how far in those 1,000 cuts, they're
Yeah.
coming, and which one you represent, because there's a term that says the what, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Oh, yes.
You don't want to be that one that, that gets payment for everybody else.
I
Uh,
love music, so I'm telling you, there's always a song in my head when stuff was happening. I was like, There's quite
so
a few songs that probably not appropriate, but there were
yeah,
some songs where I was like, y'all gonna make me lose my mind up in
yeah,
here,
yep.
up in here.
And it would be if we allowed it, and we're not as professional. Now,
Right.
hey,
That's right.
let me just say this, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that are in a position right now within the structure of psychological safety, whether
Right.
there is or not, that are on the abuse side, getting abused, right?
Right.
Um, there is a professional way
Mm-hmm.
of taking a stand. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you see me smiling
Yeah.
because obviously I've used it several times in
Right.
my career, where you put somebody where they belong because they're not trying to put me somewhere where I don't belong.
Right.
And that's something to remember from the leadership standpoint. If you're not providing psychological safety for your team, uh, they may be positioned
Mm-hmm.
both intellectually, verbally, and with some unction.
Mhm.
to put you somewhere where you never thought you would be,
Mhm.
and all professional, and hey, we're gonna smile when we leave here. We're gonna
Mhm.
be all right.
Right.
But
Right.
I need you to understand that
Right.
I know who I am. So I'm not going to accept your definition of me. And
Right.
so there's some people that can do that. And hey, by all means, exercise your strength. But at the junction of having the opportunity to provide psychological safety for your teams,
Mhm.
what should leaders start thinking about when you talk? Let's say you never did it and you're like, man, I want to do this for my people.
Right.
I want my people to feel safe psychologically in this group. And we're not
Right.
talking about kumbaya, we're not talking about singing a song. That's not
Holding
what we're
hands.
talking about. What
Yeah.
we're talking about is, can your people feel like they can speak and act, albeit professional, right, in
Right.
a way where they can bring their authentic self without losing themselves and
Right.
still get accolades for their contribution, right? Everybody's not going to get award, but can they be lauded for what they bring? And everybody wants to be in that place.
Right.
So what
Right.
should leaders be thinking about for setting the
Yeah.
foundation to
So
providing psychological safety?
so a couple things. There are a couple of questions I think are really important for leaders to ask themselves and to ask others. And I think for one-on-one meetings, you know, being vulnerable enough to ask, how can I support you better in sharing your ideas or concerns? Okay, that's the first question, and mean it. Like, people know when you're BSing them and you're just saying the words just to say the word. So if it's a one-on-one, I've been vulnerable enough to say, let me know what can I do. And I had somebody I remember many years ago. I got introduced to a new department. I was the hire from the outside. I inherited a group of project managers that were already there. And I remember I said to the team, I can get, because I'm a fixer, I can get excited. And when you share things with me, please make sure that you let me know. Are you just venting? Because we all sometimes need a safe place to vent where what you say is not going to be used against you, right? Or do you need me to take action? How can I help? And I remember a couple months later, he came into my office. One of them came into my office and started to tell me some stuff. And as I was listening to him, I picked up the phone. This was back when we were in the office. I picked up the phone and I started to call one of my peers. And he said, "Put the phone down." He goes, "Remember when you said to hold you accountable that this is something that you needed to make sure that you were checking yourself on? Because sometimes we need people to check us too, right?" He said, "I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to listen to me and hear me out. And when I'm done, I'm gonna go try what I think needs to happen. And you just, I'll come back to you if I need you." And so when I said, "How can I support you better in sharing your ideas or concerns?" I had to follow through on that. And I think that's a question that every leader should be, or not should be, sound like the word should, but can consider using in their one-on-ones. How can I support you better in sharing your ideas and concerns, and mean it? And then if you're in a group meeting, one of the other questions that that I think would be helpful is asking how can I make sure our meetings are safer for everybody to share openly. And not everybody's gonna speak, and if there's somebody that doesn't speak, then have that conversation with maybe the introverts of the group one-on-one, and they'll start to open up and tell you exactly what they need from you. Whether it's a voice to listen, or not a voice, ears to listen, or whether they want you to brainstorm with them. Some of the times, those are some of the conversations that I really enjoy, is brainstorming with people and stuff. But the ones I like the best are when they already know the answer and you're asking certain questions, and they already know the answer to the question, and then they come out on their own. And so I think that it's important because the body does keep score, and I think there's a book about that. But team members, they keep score too when you're just being somebody who's checkboxing. You can't delegate psychological safety, and you can't checkbox psychological safety like a checklist. Like you have to be in it, like you said earlier, with your heart, not not just in your mind. So those are some of the things that I would share with leaders who are really interested, genuinely interested in hearing what people have to say. And there's gonna be times when what we say is not what they want to hear. But as long as we're thoughtful about the what, hey, I heard you. Those are some really good ideas. However, I don't have the budget for that, and maybe we could look at it next year when we do budget planning, or whatever the reason is. I think for me and for the people who come to me, as long as I've made it clear the why I couldn't do whatever, we have to understand not all of our ideas are gonna always be implemented. But at least if you have that honest, transparent conversation about why I couldn't implement it, you're fostering that psychological safety because you're allowing people to share their thoughts and ideas without using what they say against them and weaponizing it and then trying to make that something that you got them. I got you. Well, look what you did wrong, or look what you said wrong, or you didn't do it the way I wanted, or you didn't think about it the way that I thought about it. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, good things to suggest for them to consider.
Yeah.
I was
That was
like,
for my
they
daughter, by
should.
the way. That was my little one. She's lazy, so that
But
was for the audience. Yeah.
yes, so what I like about those is that it takes the leader and puts them at the forefront of the request. How can I?
Right.
How can I, provide so and so? And
Yeah.
if a leader puts themselves at the forefront of the request, and it's not one of their requests or the resource, right? How can I
Hmm.
provide so and so for you to be able to do X and Z, right?
Yeah.
So if you can do that, then and I love the fact that, hey, you said
Yeah. You hold me
it's
accountable,
gonna
right?
come up. It's gonna
Yeah.
come up. Don't put it out if you ain't ready to give
That's
it.
right.
But if you do, you have already put yourself in the investment mode of your people. And look, we don't need knights in shining armors.
Mm,
What we need is representation.
that's right.
There's a lot of meetings we will never be in. And we need the type of leader that will bring us, without bringing us, right?
Right.
It's like, hey, hold up now. Did you know that that decision is going to affect 8 people at
Hmm.
least? What are we going to do about that? And that's the
Right.
type of leader that we need in these spaces that will represent us and will know what we have what we require of that organization for that time and for our livelihood. And so I think if we can get to a point as leaders that we can put ourselves ahead of the request, we will do a whole lot better for the teams.
So you said something that I really want to share because I also remember interviewing for a position at an organization, and I went through the whole. Everybody and their mother had to interview me and weigh in because we need 10 people to say she's okay, to bring her on board. But I remember one of the questions that was asked was, how did I eliminate like a poor performer? Um, like I had no idea they had some poor performers waiting for me to get hired. But anyway, that was one of the questions that they asked me, and I was like, okay, first I start with me. Like, so as a leader, have I onboarded the person properly? Have I given them the tools and the resources that they need to do their job? Have I walked them through the job description, the job standards, and made clear, you need to provide status reports every Friday at 3 o'clock by this time, or whatever the standards are? Have I done my job not as just somebody who said the words, but brought them along the journey to help them understand what is the expectation in such a way that it's, and I'm going to go back to the SMART goals because it's a PMP project management thing, right? Have I been specific? Was I measurable? Would I give them something that's measurable? Have I given them something that's attainable? Was it realistic? Is it time sensitive? What have I done to make sure that they're set up for success before you just go, oh, I got to eliminate a poor performer? If it's something that's code of conduct or code of ethics or something like that, well, sometimes that's just black and white. You can't really look at yourself for some of those things because it's outside of your control. But I think as a leader, before we go off trying to get rid of people, we should be looking at ourselves and what did we do? What have we done? Have we taken all the steps necessary to hear them out and then meet them where they are? Which was a really hard thing for me to do, because a lot of the times I was like, why aren't they getting it? And I didn't realize that I wasn't communicating as effectively as I should. So I just want to call that out, because I see a lot of, I've been making my own little spreadsheets and Excel files of things, and I see a lot of correlations between um, people of color. And this is why I'm so passionate about women and people of color, where they're not set up for success to begin with, but they want people want to remove, if they would just, if I could just get rid of them. And I'm like, let's start by giving them a fair shot. Have we done this for everybody equally? So, not just having double standards where for person A you expect this and for person B you expect that, and you're not being consistent in making sure that you've set them up for success equally across the board, because equality and equity are two different things. And I can go on off on a whole other tangent about that. But I really feel like looking at yourself as the leader first. Look at yourself first as the leader and see what it is that you're contributing to whatever this is. And so when people come to you and they're trusting you, you're listening to everything that they say and actioning against it with your some of the things that belong to you. Don't delegate things to other people that only you can provide as a leader. So I'm gonna just
Yeah, I believe that. And look, there's the fact is that there's some leaders that cannot provide psychological safety. They're not structured. They
right.
haven't been raised to be able to. Those leaders need to go and get some some training.
Yeah,
They need to get some experience.
yeah.
And
And they don't need an executive coach. I think some of them need
uh,
therapy. Dare I say?
yeah,
Say,
look,
dare I say? You need therapy, not a coach, but
because the thing is that you can't give what you don't got, right? So
right. You
when
don't got.
you are in that position of authority, that you have other people's lives in your
Mm,
hands for some number of hours. And a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I only work there." Okay, well, what about the hours you spent after work thinking about what just happened
mm.
for the last 8 hours? So they
Yes.
still own that real estate. So it's
Yes.
a whole lot more than what people say. But you have to explore as a leader, what is it about you that doesn't allow you to provide psychological safety, right? And so if
Right.
you have to go see a professional in any category, right? Because there may be many.
Right.
But if you do, then by all means go ahead and do that, not for your team, because at this point you can't help your team. Do it for yourself,
Yeah.
because the person that
Yeah.
needs
Yeah.
to get up to par in any category or position within the psychological safety realm is you. You have
Mm-hmm.
to provide it.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to dish it out to
Yeah.
somebody else so that you can come so that they can come back to you and you destroy what they built is not the answer. So the
Right.
answer is go get the help you need, get ready to come back and start to build that structure for yourself and your teams. Now, there's a lot of comments here. I'll throw them up here. Depriving leaders of resources needed to perform happens to women of color every day. Hey,
Mm.
guys, too, right? We get it too. So, um, believe me, I went through it. They need to build their emotional intelligence. They do. That is something that requires time. So that's why I said, hey, go get some help. You'll need it.
Mm-hmm.
You'll need it, because what we do is if we don't get through that, we'll eat through our people, and the
Mm-hmm.
people will get damaged and then move on, because,
Yeah.
people leave bad people, right? Bad
Yeah.
leaders, bad managers. That's what happens. Um, and or they'll try to survive you, right? Hopefully you move on before they get to have to move on, and it's a bad situation all around. Now we've talked for 50 minutes,
Woo.
right? Yeah, it goes fast. It goes fast, and I hope that folks have been taking notes or because if I got this right, I believe that when we started, you was talking about this book right here that she wrote, and that she's got an ebook version for somebody that will DM her with 5 key points that you took out of the conversation. But before we get into the end part of this, I see a lot of folks that are on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on YouTube and on Facebook. I appreciate it. Amervis, we have this book. You just got the bestseller. Congratulations on that. It's always nice to see a good book, well written, get that notoriety within the book community. And so, thank you for what you've done there. Any last things you would like to say to leaders in regards to psychological safety that you see coming up that they should start keying into? Because you know, yesterday was yesterday, and
Mhm.
and with everything that's happening around us, uh, let's just say the election period was a huge psychological impact on a lot of people, both
Yeah.
on the winning side, both and on the losing side.
Right.
Uh, we're
Whatever
coming up,
that may be. So,
yeah, yeah, whatever it may be.
yeah. So,
Nonetheless,
mhm.
you know, we're in this thing. January is coming up. Changes are going to occur. And we need to be ready psychologically
Mhm.
as leaders for the
Yeah.
people, because things are going to come up, things are going to change. Some things are going to change drastically real quick.
Mhm.
Some for the better, some maybe for the worse. Who knows? We'll find out. But leaders, how
Yeah.
can we start getting ready for
Yeah.
that time?
So, I want to be mindful of time. So I want to just share what I've talked about recently on the difference between empathy and sympathy, because where many leaders fall short is in not understanding the difference between those two words. And sympathy is saying, I'm sorry that happened to you, and then nothing else happens. It's passive, it's rooted in pity in some ways, and it often leaves people feeling even smaller. Where empathy is saying, I may not know how that feels, but I'm here to understand and help. And it's active, it's rooted in connection, and it inspires trust. And empathy requires an understanding of the weight of intersectionality in some ways, like being a woman of color, being a woman of color who's darker, because colorism plays a role in a lot of what we go through. And so when I advocate for women and people of color, and during hiring processes, I followed through. When I advocated for them, I checked in to make sure that they had opportunities to grow. I challenged microaggressions when I saw them, and I made sure that their work wasn't overlooked. And that's empathy in action. And that's why I wrote Leading with Psychological Safety, so that it can be a guide for people, leaders who want to create environments where everybody can succeed, where empathy is active, and where trust isn't just an ideal, it's a daily practice. And so, how do we do that with tech? With trust, empathy, and consistency. Trust begins when leaders advocate for marginalized voices, even when it's uncomfortable, right? Leading with empathy is moving beyond sympathy, taking the time to understand the layered challenges of your team members and acting to reduce those burdens, and showing consistency. Advocacy is not a one time event, it shows up every day and should show up in every meeting, and back your words with action. Because at the end of the day, leadership isn't about what you accomplish, it's about what you leave behind and the legacy that you leave for others.
Very powerful. And I will add one thing: compassion.
Yeah.
Right, folks?
Yes.
Look, you can have sympathy and maybe make somebody feel maybe even smaller. And you can even have empathy, but until action is taken, it doesn't become compassion. And that's where
Mhm.
we need leaders to get to. We need you to get to the point where you take action on that empathy and
Yeah.
make things happen for your folks.
Yeah.
And that's what you get into. That's why you get into big bucks for, right?
And
And
we
it may
don't
not be
know.
big bucks.
Enrique, we don't know what people are going through. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, and I hope it's not taken out of context. But I remember hearing about, I think it was a black woman in a very high, prestigious position killing herself. And I remember when I read about that and about what was happening in her workplace, I remember going, I would not kill myself. First of all, I love myself too much, man. Too much self love to do that. But I have to put myself in her shoes and go, I wonder what she went through. I wonder what was being said to her, how many times she was gaslit, how many times she was dismissed, how many times she felt like, what's the point of all this? And as leaders, we have to be mindful. We affect people's lives. We don't know what sleep they're losing over what words we said. Somebody cuts you or punches you and you have a bruise, that heals, right? If you break your leg, you have workman's comp. You go get your leg put back together again, and they address that. But sometimes we hurt people with the words that we say and the tone in which we give to them. We don't know what's happening and who we're hurting. And there's like the statistics are showing that more and more people are in duress and need mental help. And if we're the cause of that mental help, shame on us. Like, shame on us for being those kinds of leaders that do that. So maybe another question we should ask, and it just dawned on me now when I was talking, was maybe we should have that kind of conversation with our team members and be like, are you losing sleep at night over anything that I'm doing? And how can I make that right? Because you know, all lives matter. Every team member matters,
Right.
right? So anyway,
Yeah,
just
I often would joke about the leader that becomes the dinner table talk.
mm,
I would say it jokingly, but it's no joke when
yeah,
you're captivating my family time because I have to talk about you.
mm,
Yeah. How
yeah,
was your day? Well, let me tell you about my day. And there's some leaders that don't really care. That's the choice that they are making,
right,
but there are consequences to that, right? So
yeah,
every choice has a consequence. We want you to be the best leader that you
mm-hmm.
can be. We want you to be the best leader that your people deserve. And we want you to be the best leader so that when you're at home, you're at peace, right? When you're at peace, your family's at peace, and everybody gets to enjoy that.
Yeah.
Amervis, thank you so much for sharing this hour with me, sharing your book, and folks,
Thank you.
we've had a great discussion on psychological safety. We talked about many things, right? Sympathy, empathy, compassion, and we ended up with that. Thank you all who have joined us. We really appreciate you being with us. The task early on was set, right?
Yeah,
DM Amervis. Well, first of all, connect with her. DM
yeah.
her your 5 key points from this whole entire conversation, and then you can be the recipient of that wonderful book in ebook form. And I would tell you that it is a great book, well written. Somebody might have endorsed it or not. I
Yes,
don't
thank
know
you,
who,
Enrique. You have no
but
idea. To
but
have a Boricua leader
eh,
of your stature and
oh please, but it is a wonderful book. You need it as part of your library. Go get it. If you don't get the 5 points, go to Amazon and get that book. Amervis, thank you once again. God bless you.
thank
God
you,
bless
brother.
your family. Everybody, we enjoyed having you, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.